My stepdad demanded $400 rent on my 18th birthday. But when I found out the house was mine, I confronted him and exposed $130K in hidden debts they never expected. I'm 18 years old, just graduated high school like 3 months ago, and basically my life turned into a complete disaster because of a house I didn't even know was mine. Sounds weird, I know. But let me explain, because this story is so absurd that sometimes I can't even believe it myself. It all started the day I turned 18, when Victor, my stepdad, decided it was time for me to start paying rent. Just like that, out of nowhere, as if he'd been waiting for that moment for years. And the truth is, he probably had been waiting, but I'll get to that. First, I need you to understand a bit of my family history, because none of this makes sense without context. My biological dad, Benjamin, died when I was 6 years old. Cancer. It was horrible, obviously, but honestly, I don't remember much about him because I was so young. I have like blurry images, of him carrying me or playing with me in the yard, but nothing super specific. What I do remember is that my mom, Patricia, was devastated. She spent like 2 years in zombie mode, just working and taking care of me without really being present. You know what I mean? And then she met Victor. I was like 8 years old when they started dating, and honestly, at first, I liked him. He was nice, took me to the movies, bought pizzas on Fridays, that kind of thing. They got married when I was 10, and since then, the three of us lived in the same house. The house where all this disaster unfolded. The house itself is nothing special, like a 3-bedroom house in a normal middle-class neighborhood with a small front yard and a 2-car garage. It's like 30 years old or something, and honestly needs repairs because there are parts of the roof that leak when it rains hard and the heater makes a weird noise. But it was always my home, the only place I'd known my whole life. What I didn't know, and this is important, is that technically the house was mine. My dad, Benjamin, had put it in my name before he died, with some kind of trust or something that I didn't understand at all at 6 years old. And apparently my mom never explained it to me either. Like, I literally lived in my own house for 18 years without knowing it. Can you believe it? So we get to my 18th birthday. I was in my room, probably playing video games or watching YouTube, I don't remember exactly, when Victor knocks on the door and comes in with that serious face he makes when he wants to have an important conversation. He sits on my bed and says, "Nathan, you're an adult now. Congratulations. And I think it's time we talk about responsibilities." I thought he was going to give me the typical get a job or go to college speech, but no, the guy goes and tells me that from now on I have to pay $400 in rent every month. $400. For living in the house where I'd lived my whole life. I was like in shock, like, what? And he tells me it's reasonable, that other places charge much more, that I need to learn the value of money and blah blah, blah. Honestly, I felt like I'd been slapped. Not the amount itself, although $400 is a lot when you don't have a job yet. But the way he said it, so casual, as if it were the most normal thing in the world to put that pressure on your son, well, stepson technically, on his birthday. I didn't answer him anything at that moment because I was processing. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I was lying there thinking, do I really have to pay rent in my own house? And suddenly I remembered something. It was like a random flashback from when I was like 7 years old, shortly after my dad died, and my mom was crying while talking on the phone with someone about papers and lawyers and the house. I remember she said something like, "It's all in Nathan's name now. What am I going to do?" At that moment, I didn't pay attention because I was 7 years old and was more worried about my toys or whatever. But there in my bed at 18 years old, that memory came back full force. The next day I went straight to my mom and asked her, "Hey, whose house is this?" She got all nervous, started stuttering and saying it was complicated, that we'd talk later. But I insisted. I told her, "Mom, I need to know, is this house yours and Victor's or what's the deal?" And she finally admitted, very quietly, almost whispering, that the house had been in my name since my dad died. I froze. I literally felt like the floor was moving under me. I asked her why she'd never told me, why they'd let me believe it was their house, and she just started crying, saying she didn't know how to explain it to me, that it was very complicated, that There were debts. That last part confused me, but at that moment, I was so angry that I didn't process the debt thing well. I could only think about how Victor had demanded rent for my own house. I went straight to look for him, found him in the living room, watching the news, and I let him have it. I said, "Hey, Victor, about that rent you want me to pay. Turns out the house is mine, so technically you and my mom are the ones who should be paying me." You should have seen his face. At first, he thought it was a joke. He laughed and told me to stop talking nonsense, but when he saw I was serious, his expression changed completely. He turned red, started stammering something about how that wasn't possible, that the house was theirs, that my mom had kept it after Benjamin died. My mom came into the living room at that moment. She probably heard us arguing, and Victor asked her, almost shouting, if what I was saying was true. She nodded without looking him in the eye, and he exploded. He started pacing back and forth, saying how was it possible she'd never mentioned it to him, that they'd been married 8 years, that he'd been paying for repairs and utilities for a house that wasn't even technically his. Honestly, I was also angry with my mom for hiding it from me. But at that moment, I felt more satisfaction seeing Victor realize that his whole homeowner attitude had been a lie, I told him. "So about that rent, we're going to forget about that, right?" And he just looked at me with so much hatred, I thought he was going to hit me or something. Instead, he left the house, slamming the door, and didn't come back until late that night. The next few days were super awkward. Victor barely spoke to me. My mom was like a ghost around the house, and I started researching on my own what it meant exactly for the house to be in my name. I searched online, read about trusts and inheritances, and learned that basically my dad had left everything legally arranged so that when I turned 18, I could have total control of the property. The problem was, I didn't know if there were debts, mortgages, or what was up with taxes and those things. My mom had mentioned something about debts, but every time I tried to talk to her about it, she'd start crying and say she couldn't, that she'd explain it to me later. Victor didn't want to talk either. He just completely ignored me, which, honestly, was fine with me because I was fed up with his attitude. Like a week after the initial bomb, I was home on a Tuesday afternoon when I heard my mom talking on the phone in her room. The door was half open and her voice sounded stressed, like agitated. So I approached without meaning to spy on her, but also without being able to help it. You know what I mean? I heard her say things like, "I can't keep lying about this. He already knows about the house." And then, "No, I haven't told him the other thing. I don't know how to tell him." My heart started beating super fast because obviously she was talking about me, and obviously there was something more they hadn't told me. The other thing? What other secret could there be? When she finished the call, I confronted her, right there in the hallway. I asked her what was the other thing she hadn't told me, and she turned white, literally no color in her face, and swore to me it was nothing, that she was talking about something else. But I knew. She was lying. I could see it in her eyes. That night I decided that if they weren't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it out myself. It'll sound kind of intense, but I started paying attention to everything they did, especially Victor. And like 3 days later, I noticed something weird. Victor left the house on a Thursday morning when he was supposed to be at work. I was in my room, but I saw his car leave through the window. I got curious, so I followed him. Yeah, I know, super stalker of me, but I needed to know what was going on. I took the bus and followed him to a coffee shop downtown, like 20 minutes from the house. I saw him sit at a table in the back with a guy I didn't recognize, an older man like in his 50s wearing a suit. When they were talking for like 40 minutes. And at one point I saw Victor pass him some papers, and the guy reviewed them and nodded. Then Victor took out his phone, took pictures of other documents the guy showed him, and then they said goodbye. The mind was making 1,000 theories. Like, was he planning to sell the house? Was he looking for a lawyer? I had no idea, but I knew whatever it was wasn't good. That night I waited until the three of us were having dinner, which almost never happened anymore because the atmosphere was horrible, but my mom had insisted we needed to eat together as a family. Ironic, right? So there we were eating chicken with rice in the most awkward silence in the universe when I decided to drop the bomb. I told them, "Hey Victor, I saw you today at that coffee shop downtown with a guy in a suit. What was that meeting about?" He almost choked on his food, coughed a bit, and asked me what I was doing spying on him. I told him I wasn't spying, that I just saw him lie, obviously, and that I was curious because it seemed important. My mom was looking at both of us with absolute terror on her face, like she knew everything was about to explode. Victor put his fork on the table really hard, like dramatic, and I said it was his business, that he didn't have to give me explanations. But I was already tired of secrets, so I told him that if it had to do with my house, then yes, he had to give me explanations. My mom started crying right there at the table, which surprised me because I thought Victor would be the first to break. And between sobs, she said, "There's a debt on the house. Nathan, a very large debt." I asked her what she was talking about, and she explained that when Benjamin died, he left a mortgage on the house that wasn't completely paid off. For years, she'd been paying that mortgage with her salary and with Victor's help, but the balance was still huge. "How much?" I asked, and she whispered, $80,000. $80,000. I felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach. There I was, all proud of having a house in my name, and it turns out it came with an Everest-sized debt. I asked her why she'd never told me, and she just kept repeating, "I didn't want to worry you." You. They were very young. I thought we could pay it off before you turned 18. But obviously, they hadn't paid it off, and now the problem was mine. Victor finally spoke and admitted that the guy at the coffee shop was from a refinancing company. He said he'd been exploring options to refinance the mortgage or take out a second mortgage to pay off the debt faster, but that he needed my signature because I was the legal owner. That's why he hadn't told me anything, because he knew I probably wouldn't agree. And he was right, because as soon as I heard refinance and second mortgage, I got super defensive. I told him there was no way I was going to sign anything without fully understanding what it meant, that I wasn't going to let him mess up the finances of a house that wasn't even his. He got angry and told me that if I had a better idea, great, but that $80,000 wasn't going to pay itself. He was right about that, honestly. My back. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours on the internet reading about mortgage debts, payment options, refinancing, all those financial things I never thought I'd have to understand at 18 years old. The next day, I called a financial advisor. I found one who offered free phone consultations, and I explained my whole situation. The guy, his name was Lawrence, was super patient and explained to me that $80,000 was a lot, but not impossible to handle if we had a solid plan. He asked me how much my mom and Victor earned monthly, how much was already being paid on the mortgage, that kind of thing. And I honestly didn't know most of the answers because I'd never paid attention to the household finances. I told him I needed to talk to my mom and that I'd call him back. I convinced my mom and Victor that we should go together to meet with Lawrence at the bank where he worked. It was like 4 days later, on a Monday afternoon. We arrived at the bank. A super serious, gray building that made me nervous just walking in, and Lawrence received us in a small office with a desk full of papers and an old computer. He was a man like 50 years old, kind of bald, with glasses, like the classic financial advisor you see in movies. He got straight to the point, asked us for all the mortgage documents, and started reviewing them while we just sat there in awkward silence. After like 20 minutes, he looked up and said, "Okay, the situation isn't ideal, but it's not the end of the world either." He explained that with my mom and Victor's combined income, and if I got a part-time job, we could establish a payment plan that would take between 10 and 15 years to completely settle the debt. 15 years. It sounded like an eternity to me. I'd be 33 years old when we finished paying. Lawrence saw my horrified face and told me he understood it seemed like a long time, but that it was realistic considering the amount. Victor asked about the refinancing option, and Lawrence explained it could reduce the monthly payments, but would probably increase the total payment time and possibly the total amount due to interest. My mom asked if there was any way to pay faster, and Lawrence said, yes, that if we got additional income or made extra payments when we could, it would definitely help. We left that meeting kind of depressed, but at least with clear information, which was more than we had before. During the following days, I was thinking a lot about what to do. I didn't want to work the next 15 years just to pay off a debt I technically inherited without asking for it, but I also didn't want to lose my dad's house. I felt like it was the only thing I had left of him, his legacy or whatever you call it. And then I got an idea. The house had 3 bedrooms, right? My mom and Victor used one, I used another, and the third was like a storage room where we kept old boxes and junk nobody used. What if we rented out the whole house and we moved? To a cheaper apartment? The numbers started making sense in my head. We could rent the house for like $1,500 a month easily, rent a two-bedroom apartment for like $900, and use the $600 difference to pay off the debt faster, plus what each of us would contribute from our jobs. I proposed the idea to my mom first because I knew Victor would probably resist the idea of moving. And I was right. My mom listened to it and thought about it, but then said she didn't know if Victor would accept leaving the house. I told her it wasn't really his decision, that I was the owner and could make that decision, but that obviously I wanted us all to agree because at the end of the day we were family. That night we talked, all three of us, and surprisingly, Victor agreed. I think he realized he didn't have much bargaining power in the situation and that my plan would at least give us more financial flexibility. So we started preparing the house to rent it out. It took us like 3 weeks to organize everything. We cleaned the storage room, fixed things that were broken or kind of ugly, painted some walls that looked stained, that kind of thing. Victor, I must admit, was very helpful in that part because he knows about construction and repairs. We put the house on several rental platforms, took nice photos, wrote an attractive description, and in less than 2 weeks, we already had like 5 people interested in seeing it. We ended up renting it to a young couple, Justin and Ashley, who had just gotten married and were looking for a quiet place to start their life together. We signed a 1-year contract with an option to renew. They gave us the first month's rent and the deposit, and we started looking for apartments. We found one like 15 minutes away from the house. An apartment complex, not super luxurious, but decent. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, small kitchen, living dining room, enough for the 3 of us. The rent was $150 a month. A bit more than I'd originally calculated, but still left us like $550 difference for the debt. We moved like mid-September, like a month and a half ago or so. And I thought that would be the end of it. That finally we had a solid plan and things would calm down. But obviously it wasn't going to be that easy, because life is a mess and there's always something more. Like 2 weeks after moving, I got a call from the bank. From Lawrence, specifically. He told me he needed to see me urgently, that he'd discovered something reviewing the house documents more thoroughly. My stomach twisted because his tone was super serious, like worried. I went to the bank the next day, alone, because I didn't want to alarm my mom until I knew what it was about. Lawrence had me come into his office and was direct. "Nathan, there's an additional lien on the house that didn't appear in the first review." I asked him what that meant, and he explained that a lien was basically another debt tied to the property. Someone had taken out a loan using the house as collateral and never paid it back. "How much?" I asked, afraid of the answer. $50,000, he told me. 50,000 additional to the 80,000 we already owed. $130,000 total. I felt like ice water had been thrown on me. I couldn't breathe well, literally. I asked him who had taken out that loan and when. Lawrence checked the papers and said it had been taken out like 6 years ago and that the name on the loan was Patricia, my mom. She had used the house as collateral without my knowledge when I was like 12 years old, probably to cover some expense or personal debt. I left the bank on autopilot. I don't even remember how I drove back to the apartment. When I got there, my mom was making dinner, all calm and normal, and I just blurted out, "Did you take out a $50,000 loan using the house 6 years ago?" She dropped the spoon. She was holding and froze. I told her, "Lawrence from the bank just told me, there's a lien for $50,000 that you never paid. What did you do with that money?" She started crying again. Seems to be her default response to everything. And between sobs, she told me it had been to pay off Victor's and her credit card debts, that they were drowning financially at that time and didn't see another way out. "And why didn't you tell me when we started talking about the house debts?" I yelled, because honestly I couldn't control my anger anymore. She said she was ashamed, that she knew I'd get angry, that she thought they could pay it off before I found out. But obviously they didn't pay it off. They'd only been paying minimum interest for years, and the balance remained practically the same. Victor arrived at that moment and realized the situation had exploded again. I explained to him about the lien and he turned pale but didn't say anything, just looked at the floor like defeated. I haven't talked too much with either of them since that conversation, honestly. I'm too angry and disappointed. $130,000. That's the reality now. I talked to Lawrence again, and we reviewed the numbers again. With the house rent plus our income, if we're super careful and don't spend on anything unnecessary, we could pay everything off in like 20 years. 20 years. I'm going to be 38 when I'm done with this. My dad died 12 years ago, leaving me a house thinking it was a gift, a foundation for my future, and it turns out he left me a financial burden that will define my entire adult life. I know it's not his fault. The fault is with the system, the debts, the bad decisions of my mom and Victor, but I still feel betrayed by everyone, including him, even though it doesn't make sense because he just wanted to help me. The question I keep asking myself is whether it's worth it. Is it worth spending the next 2 decades of my life working to pay for a house I can't even live in? Part of me says I should sell it, settle the debts, and start from scratch without that burden. But another part, the part that remembers those blurry images of my dad playing with me in that yard, says I can't let it go. It's his legacy. It's the only tangible thing I have left of him. So, I guess I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to make those payments. And I'm going to keep that house no matter what it takes. I don't know if it's the right decision. Honestly, I have no idea, but it's the one I made. Last week, I drove by the house just to see it from outside. Justin and Ashley were there with their dog in the yard, looking happy and oblivious to all the drama that place represents. And I thought, someday I'm going to live there again, when I'm 38 or 40 or whatever age, but I'm going to go back. For my dad, I guess, and for me.